Hey, it's Cameron with Super Simple Data, coming here to talk to you today about Azure Hybrid Use Benefits, or AHUB. I'm just going to call it AHUB from this point because no one says the full thing anymore. What that is Microsoft's way to let you utilize your licenses in Azure. I'm going to specifically be talking about the SQL concepts within AHUB because the Windows stuff's really easy. You have Windows Data Center and you have software assurance. You use the same number of cores on-prem as you can use in the cloud. One-to-one, it's right there. It's super easy to nail down. But we're going to talk about SQL and AHUB today, so let's dig into it. Let's start with the relatively straightforward one, SQL running in an Azure virtual machine. So if you're running SQL in a virtual machine today, you have, two options really to license it. You have pay-as-you-go, which is the one where you just pay it on your bill every day, and it's usually retail price, and I guess it's okay if you need the dynamic use of cores. If you don't, well, you could save money. So now let's talk about the other version, true Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. That one lets you bring your own license, one-to-one, enterprise or standard, essentially enterprise to enterprise, standard to standard. And as long as you have software assurance, you can bring those up to Azure and utilize them as is. You have 180 days of a migration window to use them in both on-prem and in the cloud. I don't think any other cloud provider allows that. And it lets you get used to it, but also use things like the software assurance that you've been paying for the last X number of years and have already gotten to the point where you're not paying for the license, just the software assurance. It's the best way to go and is the easiest one to explain. Next, let's get into the added concepts around platform as a service. So this is where it gets a little weirder because there's a lot going on in the back end compared to just a virtual machine, right? So let's try managed instances first. They're relatively straightforward. If you have standard cores with software assurance, you can do those one-to-one with your general purpose managed instance. This is identical to what you can do with a general purpose SQL Azure database also. And yeah, it's not bad. It does come with the extra added benefit of an auto failover group. It didn't used to be this way. I think it changed about a month ago or at the end of 2022, I guess, where you're able to now use an auto failover group in managed instance as part of that AHUB benefit. So say you have 8 cores of SQL Standard, that will cover 8 cores of general purpose managed instance, plus 8 cores of an auto failover group managed instance. So 16 total cores with the theory that this is a passive failover. If you're using it for read-only stuff, doesn't count. Next, we bump up to the enterprise side. So if you go enterprise, it's one-to-one, enterprise to business critical. Makes sense, except there's a lot more benefits here because business critical comes with your primary node and a read-only node. It's the only way to get a read-only node covered by software assurance. Otherwise, all nodes have to be passive unless they're fully licensed, right? Now, you still get the failover group, or the auto failover group, and you still get the exact same coverages in between. But because you get that read-only node, it's a huge benefit in my opinion. So it's essentially a free readable node that you can't get any other way. Now, the other interesting thing here is if, say you have a lot of enterprise cores that you'd purchased, but you don't need that level of performance from the back end of these systems, right? You can use one enterprise core to cover 4 general purpose cores. That's where it gets a little weird because it just kind of covers extra. It's because on the back end, business critical is actually 3 or 4 nodes, and general purpose is only 2 nodes. So it comes out in the wash, I guess. The math is beyond me, lawyers and, licensing's weird. So that's the general concept there for manage instance. Okay, moving on to SQL Azure Database. It's pretty simple, exactly the same at the base level of SQL Azure DB, right? Because 1-to-1 standard to general purpose, 1-to-1 enterprise to business critical, but then 1-to-4 enterprise to general purpose. Pretty straightforward. Gets a little different when we start talking about hyperscale specifically. Hyperscale is 1-to-1 standard, 1-to-4 enterprise, or 1 enterprise for hyperscale cores, but it doesn't cover any of the secondaries, right? So you can have up to 4 at this point HA secondaries or 30 named replicas in hyperscale at this point. So with those cores, you would have to cover those again, essentially. So say you had 2 HA replicas and a primary node, each having 4 cores, you'd need 12 cores of standard to cover that. So it's not too bad. You just have to make sure that you're covering all of the above. At the end of this, right, the whole goal is to get you to come in and utilize licenses you're already paying for. I'll say for the most part, right, if you already have software assurance licenses covered and you're already just paying, maintenance on those, keep using those, bring them up to Azure. It's a great way to utilize them. If you're starting net new, get used to it. It's kind of like using a reserved instance, right? You don't need to reserve right away, but once you've stabilized on how many cores you're going to be using, then it's a good idea to either purchase with the standard licensing plus software assurance, or my personal favorite is there is the concept of subscription licenses. You'll have to talk to your Microsoft account people about that because I don't know how to get them exactly. Contracts are weird. But if you want those, they're usually significantly less expensive than the traditional L plus SA, the licensing plus software assurance. And they have the limitation of they can only be utilized in Azure. But if you're already in Azure, you've already reserved SQL Azure database for 3 years, you're going to be there a while. So get some of these licenses on contract and you'll come out way ahead in the long run for dollars. To be honest, work with your account team on any of that because there's weird limitations on what contracts they can go on and all of that and minimums. And like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a licensing guy. I just want you to find some of the stuff that's going to help you out and hopefully save you some money when you're trying to move all of this stuff into Azure and going, it's expensive. Because, right, it starts adding up. So that's all I have today. Easiest things you need to remember are 1-to-1 standard to general purpose, 1-to-1 enterprise to business critical. Everything else is extra complication. We do have a calculator for it. I'll link it in the description. That's all I got. You have a good one.